The notification sound pierced through the silence of my corner office at 11:47 p.m. After 18 months of negotiations, 3 continents, and more sleepless nights than I could count, the $2.8 billion merger between Blackstone Industries and Yamamoto Corp. Was finally mine. I reached for my phone, expecting congratulations from my team, maybe even CEO Marcus Blackstone himself. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Instead, I heard the voice of my direct supervisor, Regional Director Patricia Henley, delivered through a cold, impersonal voicemail that would change everything. Elena, effective immediately, your position has been terminated. Security will escort you out tomorrow morning. Don't bother coming in. That was it. No explanation, no meeting, no acknowledgement of the deal that would save the company from bankruptcy. Just a 30-second message that erased 6 years of my life in the corporate world. They thought they could steal my work, claim my victory, and toss me aside like yesterday's coffee. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. 6 years earlier, I walked into the glass towers of Blackstone Industries in downtown Seattle, with nothing but a business degree from Washington State, a used Honda Civic, and an unshakable belief that hard work would eventually pay off. The company specialized in industrial manufacturing partnerships, primarily with Asian markets, and had been struggling to maintain relevance as smaller, more agile competitors ate away at their market share. My first day, I sat in a cramped cubicle, on the 14th floor, surrounded by beige walls and the constant hum of fluorescent lights. The onboarding process was handled by Janet Morrison, a middle-aged woman whose enthusiasm had clearly been worn down by decades of corporate bureaucracy. She handed me a stack of client files, each one representing failed negotiations and lost opportunities. These are the accounts nobody else wants to touch, Janet explained, setting down the pile with a thud. Consider it your training ground. Don't expect much success with any of them. The first file I opened belonged to Yamamoto Corporation, a mid-sized Japanese conglomerate that manufactured precision instruments for the aerospace industry. According to the notes, Blackstone had been trying to establish a partnership with them for over 3 years. Previous attempts had failed due to cultural misunderstandings, pricing disputes, and what the files diplomatically called communication breakdowns. Reading through the correspondence, I could see why the negotiations had stalled. Every email from Blackstone's previous representatives reeked of American arrogance, treating Yamamoto Corp. Like they should be grateful for the opportunity rather than recognizing them as equals in the partnership. The language was aggressive, the timelines unrealistic, and the terms heavily favored Blackstone, despite Yamamoto bringing more value to the table. During my first week, I spent my lunch breaks in the company library, reading everything I could find about Japanese business culture. I learned about the importance of relationship building, the concept of face saving, and how patience was not just a virtue but a necessity in Japanese negotiations. While my colleagues rushed through coffee-stained proposals, I crafted my first email to Yamamoto Corp's International Relations Director, Hiroshi Tanaka. Instead of diving into business terms, I opened with a formal apology for the previous miscommunications and expressed genuine interest in understanding their company's vision. I asked thoughtful questions about their expansion goals and acknowledged their reputation in the precision manufacturing industry. The response came 3 days later, warmer and more detailed than any communication in the previous files. That small success caught the attention of my immediate supervisor, David Chen, a competent but unremarkable middle manager who had been with the company for 12 years without ever making waves. David appreciated my methodical approach and began assigning me more challenging accounts. Within 6 months, I had successfully closed deals with 2 smaller Korean manufacturers that had been considered dead ends. The Yamamoto negotiation, however, remained my side project. Every few weeks, I would exchange emails with Tanaka-san, slowly building trust and understanding. I learned about his daughter's piano recitals, his concerns about the changing aerospace market, and his company's commitment to sustainable manufacturing practices. In return, I shared insights about American market trends and Blackstone's capabilities, always positioning us as potential partners rather than vendors. My breakthrough came during my second year at the company. I had been promoted to senior account executive, which came with a modest salary increase and a slightly less cramped office space. During a routine conversation with Tanaka-san, he mentioned that Yamamoto Corp was considering a major expansion into the North American market, but was struggling to find the right manufacturing partner. This was exactly what Blackstone needed. Our Seattle facility had been operating at 60% capacity for months, and rumors of potential layoffs were becoming more frequent. I immediately reached out to our manufacturing director, Robert Hayes, to discuss our capabilities. We could handle their volume, Hayes confirmed during our meeting in his cluttered office overlooking the production floor. But we'd need to invest in some new equipment to meet their precision standards. That's not a small expense. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing a comprehensive proposal that addressed every concern Yamamoto Corp had raised over the past 18 months. I included detailed facility upgrades, quality assurance protocols, and even arranged for Tanaka-san to visit our Seattle location for a personal tour. When Patricia Henley was promoted to regional director, replacing David Chen, who had moved to the company's Portland office, I expected a smooth transition. Patricia had an MBA from Northwestern and 5 years of experience in international business development. On paper, she seemed like the perfect supervisor for someone handling complex overseas negotiations. Our first one-on-one meeting revealed a different reality. Patricia sat behind her new executive desk, barely glancing at the Yamamoto proposal I had prepared for her review. "Elena, I appreciate the work you've put into this," she said, her tone suggesting the opposite. "But I think we need to be more aggressive with our international prospects. These Japanese companies respond to strength, not all this relationship building nonsense." I tried to explain the cultural nuances, the months of trust building, and the potential value of the partnership. But Patricia had already made up her mind. She wanted me to present Yamamoto Corp with an ultimatum: accept Blackstone's terms within 30 days or end the negotiations entirely. Against my better judgment, I followed her directive. The response from Tanaka-san was politely devastating. He expressed disappointment in the sudden change of approach and suggested that perhaps Blackstone wasn't the right partner for Yamamoto Corp after all. It took me 4 months to repair the relationship. 4 months of carefully worded emails, cultural sensitivity, and gradual rebuilding of trust. I worked evenings and weekends, learning basic Japanese phrases and studying Yamamoto Corp's quarterly reports to better understand their business challenges. During this period, Patricia's management style became increasingly problematic. She would make promises to clients without consulting the account executives responsible for delivery, schedule meetings during already planned negotiations, and frequently take credit for successful deals while blaming others for any setbacks. The corporate environment at Blackstone was becoming more toxic by the month. The company's financial struggles were no secret, and upper management's response was to increase pressure on the sales team while cutting resources and support staff. Morale plummeted as employees began looking for opportunities elsewhere. Despite these challenges, my relationship with Yamamoto Corp continued to strengthen. Tanaka-san and I had developed a professional friendship built on mutual respect and shared goals. When he visited Seattle for the facility tour, I arranged meetings with our engineering team, quality control specialists, and even CEO Marcus Blackstone himself. The visit exceeded all expectations. Tanaka-san was impressed with our manufacturing capabilities and particularly appreciated our commitment to environmental sustainability, which aligned with Yamamoto Corp's corporate values. By the end of his 3-day visit, we had the framework for a partnership that would benefit both companies significantly. However, turning that framework into a binding agreement would prove to be the most challenging aspect of my career. The deal involved multiple stakeholders on both sides: complex regulatory requirements in 3 different countries, and financial arrangements that required approval from board members who had never met each other. The next 12 months were a blur of conference calls across time zones, legal document reviews, and delicate negotiations over terms that seemed to change weekly. I found myself becoming fluent in international trade regulations, currency hedging strategies, and the intricate details of aerospace manufacturing standards. Patricia's interference became more frequent and more damaging. She would join client calls without preparation, make commitments that contradicted previously agreed terms, and then blame communication failures when problems arose. On more than one occasion, I had to work overtime to repair relationships that her heavy-handed approach had damaged. The breakthrough came during a particularly difficult period when Yamamoto Corp's board was having second thoughts about the partnership. Their concerns centered around Blackstone's financial stability and recent management changes. I realized that this wasn't just about closing a deal anymore. It was about proving that American companies could be trusted partners in long-term international relationships. I spent 2 weeks preparing a presentation that went beyond typical business proposals. Instead of focusing solely on profit margins and delivery schedules, I addressed their concerns about corporate culture compatibility, long-term strategic alignment, and shared values around quality and innovation. The presentation to Yamamoto Corp's board took place via video conference at 6 a.m. Seattle time to accommodate the Tokyo schedule. For 90 minutes, I fielded questions about everything from our environmental policies to our employee retention rates. Patricia had insisted on joining the call, but I had strategically scheduled it during her usual gym time, hoping to avoid any last-minute complications. The response was cautiously positive. Yamamoto Corp's board agreed to move forward with the partnership, but they wanted additional guarantees about quality control and delivery schedules. More importantly, they specifically requested that I remain as their primary contact throughout the implementation phase. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. This level of client confidence should have been a career-defining moment, but Patricia saw it differently. During our next supervision meeting, she made it clear that she viewed the client's preference for working with me as a threat to her authority. Going forward, all communication with Yamamoto Corp needs to go through me first, she announced. We can't have clients thinking they can bypass management when they have concerns. I tried to explain that this approach would slow down communication and potentially damage the relationship we had worked so hard to build, but Patricia was adamant. She wanted control over every aspect of the deal, regardless of the impact on client satisfaction or project timeline. The final months of negotiation were exhausting. Every email to Yamamoto Corp required Patricia's approval, which often took days. Conference calls were frequently delayed because Patricia insisted on joining, but was rarely prepared with the necessary background information. Simple decisions that I could have handled in minutes stretched into weeks-long approval processes. Despite these obstacles, the deal continued to move forward. Yamamoto Corp's commitment to the partnership never wavered, largely because Tanaka-san understood that the bureaucratic delays were coming from Blackstone's management rather than from their primary contact. His patience and professionalism during this period probably saved the entire negotiation. By the time we reached the final contract stage, the deal had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations. What started as a simple manufacturing partnership had evolved into a comprehensive agreement that included technology sharing, joint research and development projects, and exclusive distribution rights for Yamamoto Corp's products in North America. The financial impact was staggering. Conservative estimates projected $2.8 billion in combined revenue over the 5-year contract term, with potential for renewal and expansion into other markets. For Blackstone Industries, this single deal would represent nearly 40% of their annual revenue and provide the financial stability needed to invest in new technologies and expand their workforce. as I prepared the final contract documents. For signature, I felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond personal career success. This deal would save jobs at our Seattle facility, establish Blackstone as a major player in the international manufacturing space, and create opportunities for future partnerships with other Asian companies. I had no idea that within 24 hours, everything would change, and the very people who would benefit most from my work would betray me in the most devastating way possible. The morning of March 15th started like any other day, except it would end with the most devastating betrayal of my professional life. I arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m., 2 hours before my scheduled call with Yamamoto Corp's legal team to finalize the last remaining contract details. The building was mostly empty, with only a few security guards and the early shift janitors moving through the corridors. My corner office on the 18th floor had become my second home over the past 6 years. The walls were covered with client appreciation letters, market analysis charts, and a large whiteboard where I tracked the progress of various negotiations. In the center of my desk sat a thick folder containing the Yamamoto Corp contract, ready for the final signatures that would change both companies forever. At 8:15 a.m., I received an unexpected email from Marcus Blackstone himself. The subject line read, "Urgent, executive meeting required." The message was brief but concerning. "Elena, please report to the executive conference room immediately. Bring all Yamamoto Corp documentation." This was unusual. In 6 years with the company, I had only been in the executive conference room twice, both times for company-wide presentations. The fact that Marcus was requesting the meeting personally, rather than going through Patricia, suggested something significant was happening. The executive conference room occupied the entire northeast corner of the 20th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay, and the polished mahogany table could seat 20 people comfortably. When I arrived, Marcus was already there, along with Patricia, Chief Financial Officer Linda Rodriguez, and 2 people I didn't recognize wearing expensive suits. "Elena, thank you for coming," Marcus said, gesturing to an empty chair. "I'd like you to meet Sarah Mitchell and James Parker from Meridian Consulting. They're helping us with some strategic planning." The consultants looked like they had stepped out of a business magazine. Sarah had perfectly styled blonde hair and wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. James was younger, maybe early 30s, with the confident demeanor of someone who had never experienced real failure. "We've been reviewing your work on the Yamamoto Corp deal," Sarah began, opening a leather portfolio. "Impressive progress, but we have some concerns about the timeline and terms." I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of concerns? The deal is essentially finalized. We're just waiting for the final signatures. James leaned forward, consulting his tablet. "Our analysis suggests that Blackstone is accepting terms that are far too favorable to Yamamoto Corp. The profit margins are below industry standards, and the technology sharing agreement gives them too much access to our proprietary processes." "That's not accurate," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "The terms are balanced and reflect the long-term value of the partnership. The technology sharing is mutual, and the profit margins account for the volume guarantees and exclusivity clauses." Patricia spoke up for the first time. "Elena, I think you've become too emotionally invested in this deal. Sometimes we need an outside perspective to see the bigger picture." The phrase "emotionally invested" hit me like a slap. I had spent 18 months building this partnership through careful relationship management and cultural sensitivity. What Patricia called emotional investment, I called professional competence. "The deal is worth $2.8 billion over 5 years, I said, pulling out my documentation. "Our manufacturing facility will operate at full capacity for the first time in 3 years. We'll be able to hire back the workers who were laid off and invest in new equipment. This partnership positions Blackstone as a major player in the Pacific Rim market." Sarah exchanged a look with James before responding. "Those projections seem optimistic. Our independent analysis suggests the actual value is closer to $1.8 billion, and the risks associated with international partnerships of this magnitude are substantial. I realized what was happening. These consultants had been brought in to discredit my work, to provide cover for a decision that had already been made. The question was, what decision? Marcus, I said, turning to the CEO. You've seen the quarterly reports. You know our financial situation. This deal solves our immediate cash flow problems and positions us for long-term growth. Yamamoto Corp has been operating profitably for 40 years. They're not a risky partner. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Elena, I appreciate your dedication to this project, but we need to consider all options. Meridian Consulting has presented us with an alternative approach that might be more suitable for our current situation. James opened his presentation folder with theatrical precision. We've identified a domestic partnership opportunity with Henderson Manufacturing Group. They're interested in acquiring Blackstone's Seattle facility and maintaining the current workforce. The transaction would provide immediate capital injection and eliminate the complexities of international operations. My blood ran cold. Henderson Manufacturing Group was a competitor known for aggressive cost-cutting and facility consolidation. Their maintaining the workforce promises typically lasted about 6 months before massive layoffs began. Henderson Manufacturing is a corporate vulture, I said, no longer caring about diplomatic language. They buy struggling companies, strip their assets, and sell off the pieces. Their offer might provide short-term cash, but it's a death sentence for Blackstone's long-term viability. That's a rather dramatic characterization, Patricia interjected. Henderson has a solid reputation in the industry. They've acquired 12 companies in the past 5 years, I responded. 7 of those facilities have been closed, and the remaining 5 operate with skeleton crews. Is that really the future we want for Blackstone? The room fell silent. I could see the discomfort on Marcus's face, but also the resignation. He had already made his decision, and this meeting was just a formality. Sarah closed her portfolio and stood up. We appreciate your input, Elena, but the executive team needs to consider what's best for the company as a whole. The Henderson offer provides certainty in an uncertain market. What about the Yamamoto Corp deal? I asked. The contracts are ready for signature. We're hours away from closing the biggest deal in company history. We've decided to decline the Yamamoto Corp partnership, Marcus said quietly. The terms are too risky, and the timeline doesn't align with our immediate needs. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. 18 months of work, countless hours of relationship building, and the solution to all of Blackstone's financial problems was being thrown away for a quick sale to a company that would destroy everything we had built. This is insane, I said, standing up from my chair. You're destroying the company to save it. Henderson will gut our operations and sell off our client relationships. The Yamamoto deal represents sustainable growth and long-term stability. Decision has been made, Patricia said firmly. We'll need you to contact Yamamoto Corp and inform them that we're declining the partnership. I won't do it, I replied. I won't destroy a relationship that took 18 months to build just so you can sell the company to corporate raiders. The silence that followed was deafening. James and Sarah exchanged another look, this time with barely concealed satisfaction. They had orchestrated this confrontation, knowing that my refusal would provide them with the justification they needed for their next move. Marcus cleared his throat. Elena, I understand your frustration, but you're an employee of Blackstone Industries. We need you to follow company directives even when you disagree with them. Then find someone else to do it, I said, gathering my folders. I won't be the one to destroy 18 months of work and throw away the future of this company. I walked out of the conference room, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. The elevator ride back to my office felt like a descent into hell. Everything I had worked for, everything I had achieved, was being dismantled by people who didn't understand the first thing about international business or long-term strategic planning. Back in my office, I sat at my desk staring at the Yamamoto Corp contract. In a few hours, I was supposed to have a call with Tanaka-san to finalize the last details. Instead, I would have to explain that Blackstone Industries had decided to reject the partnership for reasons that made no business sense. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Tanaka-san's direct number. "Good morning, Elena-san," his familiar voice came through the speaker. "I hope you are well. I wanted to confirm our call this afternoon and let you know that our board is very excited about finalizing the partnership." "Good morning, Tanaka-san," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm afraid we need to discuss some developments on our end." There was a pause. "Is there a problem with the contract terms? We thought everything had been agreed upon." "The terms are fine," I said. "The problem is with Blackstone's management. They've decided to pursue a different strategic direction." Another pause. Longer this time. "I see. This is very unexpected. May I ask what has changed?" I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to explain about the consultants, about Henderson, manufacturing, about the short-sighted decision-making that was destroying both companies' futures. Instead, I said, "I'm not authorized to discuss the details, but I want you to know that this decision doesn't reflect any problems with Yamamoto Corp. Or dissatisfaction with the partnership terms." "I understand," Tanaka-san said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is disappointing news. We had hoped for a long-term relationship with Blackstone Industries." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I'm truly sorry." After ending the call, I sat in my office for another hour, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline. 6 years of my life had been invested in this company, and now I was watching it destroy itself through corporate cowardice and short-term thinking. At 3:30 p.m., I received an email from Human Resources requesting a meeting to discuss recent developments. I knew what that meant. Patricia had probably reported my refusal to follow directives, and now HR was going to initiate disciplinary action. The HR meeting was exactly what I expected. Jennifer Walsh, the HR director, sat across from me with a concerned expression that didn't quite hide her discomfort with the situation. "Elena, we've received reports that you refused to follow direct instructions from your supervisor regarding the Yamamoto Corp account," she began. "That's correct," I said. "I refuse to destroy a valuable business relationship based on the advice of consultants who don't understand our industry or our clients." "I understand your frustration," Jennifer continued, "but insubordination is a serious offense. We need to discuss a path forward that works for everyone." "What kind of path forward?" I asked. "We're prepared to offer you a generous severance package in exchange for your resignation. This would allow you to leave the company with your reputation intact and provide you with financial support while you look for other opportunities." I almost laughed. "You want me to resign so you can avoid the paperwork associated with firing me for insubordination?" "We want to find a solution that's beneficial for everyone involved," Jennifer replied diplomatically. "What happens if I don't resign?" "Then we'll have to proceed with disciplinary action, which could result in termination for cause. That would make it difficult for you to find employment elsewhere." I understood the game. They wanted me gone, but they didn't want to deal with the potential legal implications of firing someone who had just negotiated the biggest deal in company history. A resignation would be clean and simple. "I need time to think about it," I said. "Of course. Take the weekend. We can discuss this further on Monday." I spent the weekend in a fog of anger and disbelief. Every time I thought about the Yamamoto Corp deal, about Tanaka-san's disappointed voice, about the jobs that would be lost when Henderson Manufacturing took over, I felt sick to my stomach. On Sunday evening, I made my decision. I would not resign. If they wanted me gone, they would have to fire me, and I would make sure that everyone understood why. I would document everything, from the consultant's flawed analysis to Patricia's interference in client relationships to the executive team's willingness to sacrifice long-term success for short-term gain. Monday morning, I arrived at the office early and began organizing my files. If I was going to be terminated, I wanted to ensure that my replacement would have access to accurate information about all my accounts, including the real story behind the Yamamoto Corp negotiations. At 10 a.m., I received a call from Jennifer Walsh asking me to come to her office. I walked through the corridors knowing that this would probably be my last day at Blackstone Industries. "Have you made your decision?" Jennifer asked as I sat down. "I'm not resigning," I replied. "If you want me gone, you'll have to fire me." Jennifer nodded, as if she had expected this response. "I'm sorry to hear that. Unfortunately, your refusal to follow direct instructions and your confrontational attitude toward management leaves us with no choice but to terminate your employment." "Effective when?" I asked. "Immediately. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings, and then you'll need to leave the building." And just like that, 6 years of my career ended. As I cleaned out my desk under the watchful eye of a security guard, I could feel my colleagues staring. Some looked sympathetic. Others seemed relieved that it wasn't happening to them. I was escorted to the parking garage and watched as my keycard was deactivated. As I drove away from the Blackstone Industries building for the last time, I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and something else I couldn't quite identify. It would take me several hours to realize that the other emotion was determination. They thought they could steal my work, take credit for my relationships, and throw me away like I was nothing. They had no idea what they had just started. That night, I sat in my studio apartment in Capitol Hill, staring at my laptop screen while the reality of unemployment sank in. The termination had happened so quickly that I barely had time to process it. One moment I was preparing to close the biggest deal in Blackstone's history, and the next I was jobless, watching my career crumble because of corporate politics and consultant manipulation. My phone buzzed with a text from my former colleague, Rachel Kim, who worked in the accounting department. "Can't believe they fired you. This place is going insane." Patricia called an all-hands meeting and announced the Henderson deal like it was some kind of victory. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my personal laptop. Over the years, I had developed a habit of backing up important work files to my personal cloud storage, partly for security and partly because I often worked from home. What I discovered as I browsed through my backup files would change everything. Hidden in folders labeled with innocuous names like industry research and market analysis, I had inadvertently created a comprehensive archive of Blackstone's internal communications, client correspondence, and strategic planning documents. More importantly, I had detailed records of every interaction with Yamamoto Corp., including Patricia's interference and the consultant's flawed analysis. But it was what I found in a folder labeled Network Security Training that made my pulse quicken. During my third year at Blackstone, the company had required all employees to complete cybersecurity training. As someone who had always been interested in technology, I had gone beyond the basic requirements and earned several certifications in network security and systems administration. The training materials included detailed documentation of Blackstone's IT infrastructure, including network diagrams, server configurations, and security protocols. At the time, this information seemed like useful background knowledge for understanding how the company operated. Now, it represents something far more valuable. I spent the next 3 hours reviewing the network documentation, mapping out the connections between different systems, and identifying potential vulnerabilities. Blackstone's IT infrastructure was typical of a mid-sized corporation, a central server farm connected to workstations through a fairly standard network architecture, with remote access capabilities for employees who worked from home. The more I studied the documentation, the more I realized how much access I still had. My personal laptop contained VPN credentials that allowed me to connect to the company network from home, certificates for accessing the document management system, and even administrative passwords that I had been given for troubleshooting client presentation issues. By 2 a.m., I had formulated a plan that was both simple and devastating. If Blackstone wanted to destroy everything I had built, I would give them a taste of what real destruction looked like. The next morning, I called in sick to my job search and instead focused on reconnaissance. Using my still active VPN credentials, I logged into Blackstone's network and began exploring the current state of their systems. To my amazement, my access had not been revoked. Either the IT department had forgotten about my remote access privileges, or they were so overwhelmed with the Henderson manufacturing transition that security cleanup had fallen through the cracks. My first stop was the email server. Patricia's inbox revealed the extent of the conspiracy that had led to my termination. Email threads with the Meridian consultants showed that the decision to reject the Yamamoto Corp deal had been made weeks before our meeting. The consultants had been hired specifically to provide justification for a predetermined outcome. Even more damaging were the communications with Henderson Manufacturing. The acquisition terms were even worse than I had imagined. Henderson was paying barely 60 cents on the dollar for Blackstone's assets, with clauses that allowed them to reduce the purchase price if certain performance metrics weren't met. The workforce retention guarantees that had been mentioned in our meeting were limited to 90 days, after which Henderson could terminate employees without penalty. But the most infuriating discovery was in an email from Patricia to Marcus, Blackstone, sent the day after my termination. The Yamamoto situation has been resolved. We've eliminated the primary obstacle to the Henderson deal. I recommend we move forward with the acquisition as quickly as possible to prevent any complications. The primary obstacle. That's how she described 18 months of relationship building and a $2.8 billion partnership opportunity. I was just an obstacle to be eliminated. I spent the rest of the day documenting everything I found, taking screenshots of emails, financial projections, and internal memos. The evidence painted a clear picture of corporate malfeasance, breach of fiduciary duty, and deliberate destruction of shareholder value. That evening, I received an unexpected phone call from Tanaka-san. His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the underlying frustration. "Elena-san, I hope you don't mind me calling your personal number. I obtained it from our previous correspondence." "Of course not, Tanaka-san. I'm always happy to hear from you. I wanted to inform you that we have learned some disturbing information about Blackstone Industries. Our research team has discovered that the company is in advanced negotiations to sell their manufacturing facility to Henderson Manufacturing Group." My heart sank. If Yamamoto Corp had discovered the Henderson deal, it meant the information was becoming public. "I'm sorry you had to learn about it that way. What concerns us most," Tanaka-san continued, "is that this decision appears to have been made while we were in active negotiations. This suggests that Blackstone was not negotiating in good faith." "That's correct," I said. "The decision to reject our partnership was made before our final meeting. I was not informed of this decision until after I had spent months preparing for the closing." There was a long pause. "Elena-san, may I ask what your current situation is with Blackstone Industries?" "I'm no longer employed there," I replied. "I was terminated for refusing to mislead you about the reasons for rejecting the partnership." Another pause. Longer this time. "I see. This is very troubling. Yamamoto Corp values integrity above all else in our business relationships. The fact that you were terminated for maintaining honesty speaks well of your character, but poorly of Blackstone's management. I appreciate your understanding, Tanaka-san. Perhaps we should schedule a call to discuss this situation further. There may be opportunities for future collaboration that don't involve Blackstone Industries." After ending the call with Tanaka-san, I realized that my termination had created an unexpected opportunity. If I could demonstrate Blackstone's bad faith negotiations and corporate mismanagement, Yamamoto Corp might be willing to work with me directly on future projects. But first, I needed to ensure that Blackstone paid a price for their betrayal. I spent the next 2 days planning my attack. The goal wasn't just revenge, it was to expose the truth about what had happened and prevent Henderson Manufacturing from completing their acquisition of Blackstone's assets. My technical background gave me several options for disrupting Blackstone's operations, but I wanted to choose methods that would be dramatic and visible without causing permanent damage to the company's data or systems. The employees who would suffer from the Henderson acquisition weren't responsible for management's bad decisions. The plan I settled on was elegant in its simplicity. I would use my administrative access to Blackstone's network to systematically shut down their critical systems during the most important phase of the Henderson Manufacturing acquisition. The timing would be crucial. I needed to strike when the disruption would cause maximum damage to the deal negotiations. My inside knowledge of Blackstone's operations told me that Henderson's due diligence team would be conducting their final systems audit on Thursday morning. This would involve testing the manufacturing facility's computer-controlled equipment, reviewing the financial reporting systems, and verifying the client database integrity. If Blackstone's systems were offline during this critical audit, Henderson would likely demand a significant reduction in the purchase price or potentially withdraw their offer entirely. At minimum, it would delay the acquisition and give Blackstone's board time to reconsider their decision. On Wednesday evening, I began my assault on Blackstone's network infrastructure. My first target was the email server. Using my administrative credentials, I initiated a system-wide backup process that would consume all available bandwidth and make email communication impossible. The backup was scheduled to run for 48 hours, ensuring that no one could send or receive messages during the Henderson audit. Next, I accessed the manufacturing control systems. These computers managed the automated production equipment and quality control processes. I didn't want to damage the actual machinery, but I could easily disable the monitoring software that tracked production metrics and equipment status. Without this data, Henderson's auditors would be unable to verify the facility's operational capabilities. The financial reporting system was my third target. I modified the database connection parameters to point to a non-existent server, effectively making all financial data inaccessible. This wouldn't destroy any information, but it would prevent Henderson's team from reviewing Blackstone's financial records. Finally, I targeted the client relationship management system that contained all of Blackstone's customer data and sales history. I implemented a rolling backup routine that would lock the database for maintenance every 30 minutes, making it impossible to access customer information consistently. By 11 p.m., I had successfully compromised 4 critical systems without triggering any security alerts. Blackstone's IT department would arrive Thursday morning to find their network in complete chaos, with no obvious explanation for the widespread system failures. But I wasn't finished. I had one more surprise planned that would ensure maximum impact. Using my access to the company's public relations system, I drafted a press release announcing Blackstone's decision to accept a partnership offer from Yamamoto Corporation. The release included quotes from Marcus Blackstone praising the innovative partnership that will drive growth and create jobs, and detailed financial projections showing the long-term benefits of the deal. I scheduled the press release to be distributed to major business publications at 9 a.m. Thursday morning, exactly when Henderson's audit team would be discovering that Blackstone's systems were completely offline. The confusion would be devastating. Henderson Manufacturing would see a press release announcing a competing deal while simultaneously discovering that they couldn't verify any of Blackstone's operational data. The business media would report on the Yamamoto partnership while Blackstone's management scrambled to explain why their systems had failed during a critical acquisition audit. As I executed the final steps of my plan, I felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond simple revenge. I was giving Blackstone's employees a chance to keep their jobs, exposing the corrupt decision-making process that had led to my termination, and demonstrating that corporate betrayal comes with consequences. At midnight, I initiated the final phase of the attack. I accessed Blackstone's network monitoring system and disabled all automatic recovery protocols. This would prevent the IT department from quickly restoring the compromised systems and ensure that the disruption lasted for the maximum amount of time. Then I did something that would ensure my message was unmistakably clear. I accessed the company's internal messaging system and sent a single message to every employee in the building. The Yamamoto Corp deal was worth $2.8 billion over 5 years. Ask your management why they chose to sell you to Henderson Manufacturing. Instead, as I logged off Blackstone's network for the last time, I realized that tomorrow would bring chaos, confusion, and hopefully, justice. Patricia Henley and the rest of Blackstone's executive team were about to learn that some people fight back when they're betrayed. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Seattle sunshine that made the city's glass towers sparkle like diamonds. I woke up at 6 a.m., not from an alarm but from anticipation. Today, Blackstone Industries would discover what happened when they underestimated the wrong person. I made coffee and opened my laptop to monitor the chaos that was about to unfold. Using a secure proxy connection, I could access Blackstone's public-facing systems and watch the drama in real time without revealing my location or identity. At 7:15 a.m., the first signs of trouble appeared. Blackstone's website began displaying intermittent error messages as their web servers struggled with the resource conflicts I had created. Their stock price monitoring system showed unusual activity as automated trading algorithms detected the early system anomalies. By 7:45 a.m., my phone started buzzing with text messages from former colleagues who were arriving at work to find their computers displaying error messages and their email accounts inaccessible. Rachel Kim sent me a panicked message. "Everything's broken. Email down, phones down, even the coffee machines aren't working. IT guys running around like headless chickens." The coffee machines were an unexpected bonus. Blackstone's facilities management system was connected to the same network infrastructure I had targeted, and the cascading failures were affecting systems I hadn't even considered. At 8:30 a.m., I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, I heard the stressed voice of Jennifer Walsh from Human Resources. "Elena, I know this is unusual, but we're experiencing some technical difficulties at the office. Did you take any IT equipment with you when you left?" "Just my personal laptop," I replied, trying to sound confused. "Why? What kind of technical difficulties?" "Our entire network is down. Email, phones, manufacturing systems, everything. It is saying it might be some kind of cyber attack." "That sounds serious," I said. "Have you contacted the FBI? They handle cyber crimes?" There was a pause. "We're exploring all options. If you think of anything that might be relevant, please let us know." After hanging up, I almost laughed. They were so focused on external threats that they hadn't even considered the possibility that someone with legitimate access credentials might be responsible. At 9 a.m. exactly, the press release hit the newswires. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with notifications from financial news apps. The headlines were everything I had hoped for. Blackstone Industries announces major partnership with Japanese manufacturer. Seattle company secures $2.8 billion deal with Yamamoto Corp. And Blackstone stock surges on partnership news. The timing was perfect. Henderson Manufacturing's audit team would be arriving at Blackstone's offices to find systems in complete chaos, while simultaneously learning from the news that their acquisition target had apparently secured a competing deal. I switched to monitoring business news websites and social media platforms to track the developing story. Financial analysts were already speculating about the impact of the Yamamoto partnership on Blackstone's valuation, with some suggesting that the Henderson acquisition might be overpriced if Blackstone had alternative options. At 9:23 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was Marcus Blackstone himself. "Elena, I need to ask you directly. Did you have anything to do with the press release that went out this morning?" "What press release?" I asked innocently. "Someone issued a statement claiming that..." We've finalized a partnership with Yamamoto Corporation. Our communications department says they didn't authorize it, and our PR firm has no record of the release. Maybe it was a mistake, I suggested. These things happen. The release included detailed financial projections and quotes attributed to me personally. This isn't a mistake, it's sabotage. Marcus, I was fired 3 days ago. How would I have access to your press release system? Another pause. Our network security team is investigating. If we find evidence that you were involved in this incident, we'll pursue criminal charges. I understand, I replied calmly. I hope you figure out what happened. It sounds like a serious security breach. After ending the call, I realized that Marcus was beginning to suspect my involvement, but suspicion wasn't proof. Without evidence that I had accessed their systems, they couldn't take any legal action. At 10:15 a.m., the situation escalated dramatically. Henderson Manufacturing issued their own press release announcing that they were suspending acquisition discussions with Blackstone Industries pending resolution of operational and communications issues. The acquisition that Patricia and the consultants had been so eager to pursue was falling apart in real time. I received another text from Rachel. Henderson team walked out, literally just left. Patricia having a complete meltdown in the conference room. Marcus called an emergency board meeting. The chain reaction was exceeding my most optimistic expectations. Not only had I successfully disrupted the Henderson acquisition, but I had also created a scenario where Blackstone's board would be forced to reconsider their strategic direction. At 11 a.m., I received an unexpected call from Tanaka-san. Elena-san. I have seen the news reports about our partnership. This is very confusing, as we were told that Blackstone had rejected our proposal. I'm as surprised as you are, I replied carefully. I haven't been involved in any recent negotiations. The press release contains very specific details about our previous discussions. Information that would only be available to someone with intimate knowledge of our negotiations. I realized that Tanaka-san was testing me, trying to determine if I had been involved in issuing the false press release. Perhaps someone at Blackstone changed their mind about the partnership after recent developments. Perhaps, he said thoughtfully. Would you be available for a conversation later today? There are some developments on our end that might interest you. After confirming the call, I spent the next hour monitoring the financial markets. Blackstone's stock price was experiencing wild swings as investors tried to process the conflicting information about the company's future. The Henderson acquisition had been seen as a desperate move by a struggling company, but the Yamamoto partnership suggested growth potential that could justify a much higher valuation. By noon, the story had evolved beyond simple corporate confusion into a full-blown crisis. Technology journalists were reporting on Blackstone's mysterious network failures, while business reporters investigated the conflicting partnership announcements. Social media was filled with speculation about corporate espionage, insider trading, and potential merger manipulation. At 12:30 p.m., I received a call from an FBI agent named Detective Williams, who specialized in cybercrimes. Ms. Martinez, we're investigating a potential computer intrusion at Blackstone Industries. We understand that you were recently employed there? That's correct, I replied. I was terminated on Monday. Can you tell me about the circumstances of your termination? I provided a carefully edited version of events, focusing on the disagreement over the Yamamoto Corp deal, without mentioning my technical access or knowledge of the network infrastructure. Did you retain any company equipment or access credentials? After your termination? Detective Williams asked. No, I returned my company laptop and access card when I was escorted out. We may need to examine your personal computer and phone records as part of our investigation. Would you be willing to cooperate with that? Of course, I said. I want to help in any way I can. I knew that my personal laptop wouldn't reveal anything incriminating. All of my network access had been accomplished using legitimate credentials through encrypted connections that wouldn't leave traces on my local machine. At 1:15 p.m., the story took another dramatic turn. an investigative journalist named Thomas Chen from the Seattle Business Journal published an article titled, "Inside the Blackstone Meltdown: How Corporate Consultants Destroyed a $1 Billion Deal." The article contained detailed information about Meridian Consulting's role in convincing Blackstone to reject the Yamamoto partnership, the flawed financial analysis that had been used to justify the decision, and the generous fees that Henderson Manufacturing had paid to the consulting firm for their strategic advice. I hadn't provided this information to the journalist, which meant that someone inside Blackstone was leaking details about the corporate decision-making process. The company was imploding from both external pressure and internal dissent. At 2 p.m., I had my scheduled call with Tanaka-san. His news was better than I had dared to hope. "Elena-san, Yamamoto Corporation's board has authorized me to extend an offer of employment to you. We would like you to join our North American operations as Director of Strategic Partnerships." "That's very generous," I replied, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "We have been impressed with your professionalism and integrity throughout our negotiations with Blackstone. Recent events have only reinforced our belief that you would be a valuable addition to our team." "What would the position involve?" "You would be responsible for identifying and developing partnerships with North American companies that align with our expansion goals. The compensation would be competitive, and the position would be based in our Seattle office." The irony was perfect. While Blackstone struggled to repair the damage from their betrayal, Yamamoto Corp was offering me the opportunity to build the kind of partnerships that Blackstone had rejected. "I'm very interested," I said. "When would you like me to start?" "If you're available, we could begin next Monday. We have several potential partnerships in development that would benefit from your expertise." At 3:30 p.m., Blackstone issued an official statement attempting to clarify the morning's confusion. The statement acknowledged technical difficulties and unauthorized communications, while confirming that the Henderson Manufacturing acquisition was temporarily suspended pending resolution of operational issues. The statement also announced that Patricia Henley had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into management decisions and communications protocols. The executive team that had orchestrated my termination was beginning to face consequences for their actions. At 4 p.m., I received one final call from Marcus Blackstone. "Elena, I owe you an apology. We've discovered some troubling information about the consulting firm that advised us to reject the Yamamoto deal. It appears that Meridian Consulting had a financial relationship with Henderson Manufacturing that they didn't disclose." "That sounds like a conflict of interest," I replied. "We're exploring legal action against both firms. More importantly, we're reconsidering our strategic direction. Would you be interested in returning to Blackstone to help us rebuild the Yamamoto relationship?" "Marcus, I appreciate the offer, but I've already accepted another position." "With whom?" "Yamamoto Corporation. I start on Monday as their Director of Strategic Partnerships." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus was realizing that Blackstone had not only lost the biggest deal in their history, but had also handed their most skilled negotiator to their former potential partner. "I see," he said finally. "I suppose we deserve that." As I hung up the phone, I looked out my apartment window at the Seattle skyline. Somewhere in those glass towers, Blackstone Industries was trying to piece together how their careful plans had gone so spectacularly wrong. They would probably never discover the full extent of my involvement in their downfall, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they had learned a valuable lesson about the consequences of betrayal. Corporate executives could manipulate consultants, manufacture justifications for bad decisions, and sacrifice employees to protect their own interests. But they couldn't escape the fundamental truth that actions have consequences. Tomorrow I will begin my new career with a company that values integrity and long-term thinking. Blackstone Industries would continue to struggle with the aftermath of their choices, probably eventually declaring bankruptcy when the Henderson deal fell through completely. Justice had been served, and it tasted better than any revenge I could have imagined. 3 months after the Blackstone meltdown, I was sitting in my new corner office on the 30th floor of the Columbia Center, Seattle's tallest building. The view stretched across Elliott Bay to the Olympic Mountains, and every morning I could see the Blackstone Industries building in the distance, a constant reminder of how dramatically my life had changed. Yamamoto Corporation's North American headquarters occupied 3 floors of the prestigious downtown tower with state-of-the-art conference facilities, a traditional Japanese garden on the executive floor, and technology that made Blackstone's systems look ancient by comparison. My title of Director of Strategic Partnerships came with a salary that was 40% higher than what Blackstone had paid me, plus equity participation in the company's North American expansion. But the real satisfaction came from the work itself. In just 12 weeks, I had identified and initiated partnership discussions with 7 major North American manufacturers, 3 aerospace companies, and 2 technology firms that aligned perfectly with Yamamoto Corp's long-term growth strategy. My first major success had been negotiating a partnership with Denver-based Pinnacle Aerospace, a company that manufactured guidance systems for commercial satellites. The deal was worth $1.2 billion over 4 years and established Yamamoto Corp as a key player in the rapidly growing commercial space industry. The second breakthrough came when I connected Yamamoto Corp with Cascade Technologies, a Portland-based company that developed advanced materials for electric vehicle batteries. The partnership would allow Yamamoto Corp to enter the electric vehicle supply chain while providing Cascade with access to Asian markets they couldn't reach independently. Each successful negotiation reinforced Tanaka-san's decision to hire me and demonstrated the value of relationship-based business development over the aggressive, short-term tactics that had characterized my final months at Blackstone. The contrast with my former employer's situation couldn't have been more stark. Blackstone Industries had become a cautionary tale in business schools and management consulting firms. The Henderson Manufacturing acquisition had collapsed completely when their due diligence revealed the extent of Blackstone's operational and financial problems. Without the immediate cash injection from the sale, Blackstone was forced to seek emergency funding from private equity firms at extremely unfavorable terms. Marcus Blackstone had resigned as CEO in February, replaced by an interim executive brought in by the private equity investors. Patricia Henley had been terminated for cause and was facing potential legal action for her role in the consulting firm scandal. The workforce that the Henderson deal was supposed to protect had been reduced by 60% as the new owners focused on cost-cutting rather than growth. But perhaps the most satisfying development was the outcome of the FBI investigation into the cyber attack on Blackstone systems. After 6 weeks of forensic analysis, federal investigators concluded that the network failures had been caused by a combination of system vulnerabilities, inadequate security protocols, and possible insider access by unknown parties. The technical language obscured the fact that they had found no conclusive evidence linking me to the attack. My legitimate access credentials, the encrypted connections, and the careful timing of my actions had left no digital fingerprints that could be traced back to my personal equipment. Detective Williams had called me in March to inform me that the investigation was being closed without charges. We couldn't establish a clear connection between any specific individual and the network intrusion, he explained. The security failures appear to have been systemic rather than the result of targeted criminal activity. The irony was that Blackstone's own security weaknesses had provided me with the perfect cover. Their failure to revoke my access credentials, update their security protocols, or monitor network activity had made my attack possible while simultaneously making it impossible to prove. During my 4th month at Yamamoto Corp., I received an unexpected visitor. Thomas Chen, the investigative journalist who had written the exposé about the Blackstone consulting scandal, requested a meeting to discuss my experiences in the industry. We met at a coffee shop in Pioneer Square, far enough from both my current and former offices to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Thomas was younger than I had expected, probably in his early 30s, with the intense curiosity that characterized successful investigative reporters. "I've been following your career transition," he said after we ordered coffee. "From Blackstone to Yamamoto Corp., right in the middle of one of the biggest corporate meltdowns in Seattle history. That's quite a coincidence." I was fortunate that Yamamoto Corp was looking for someone with my background, I replied carefully. "The timing was remarkable. You get fired from Blackstone on Monday, their systems crash on Thursday, and by Friday you have a job with the company they rejected, almost like poetic justice." "I prefer to think of it as karma," I said. "Good work eventually gets recognized, even if it takes time." Thomas smiled. "I've been investigating corporate consulting firms and their relationships with acquisition targets. What I found about Meridian Consulting and Henderson Manufacturing was just the tip of the iceberg." He pulled out a tablet and showed me a network diagram that mapped financial relationships between consulting firms, private equity companies, and distressed corporations. The web of connections was far more extensive than I had realized. Meridian Consulting has advised companies to reject partnership opportunities in favor of sales to Henderson Manufacturing at least 12 times in the past 3 years, Thomas explained. In every case, the consulting fees were ultimately paid by Henderson through shell companies and subsidiary relationships. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Blackstone hadn't been the victim of a single bad decision. They had been targeted by a systematic scheme to acquire undervalued companies by manipulating their management decisions. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I think you understand better than most how these schemes work and why they need to be exposed. Companies like Blackstone think they're getting independent advice, but they're actually being manipulated into making decisions that benefit the consultants and their real clients." Thomas was working on a book about corporate consulting fraud, and he wanted to interview me about my experiences navigating the relationship between consultants, executives, and client interests. I agreed to provide background information, though I was careful not to discuss anything that might reveal my role in Blackstone's technical difficulties. The conversation with Thomas reinforced my belief that what I had done to Blackstone was not just personal revenge, but a form of corporate justice. They had been willing participants in a scheme that would have destroyed jobs, eliminated valuable partnerships, and enriched consultants at the expense of shareholders and employees. In May, I received news that provided the perfect capstone to the entire Blackstone saga. Yamamoto Corp had been approached by 3 different private equity firms about acquiring Blackstone Industries' remaining assets, including their client relationships and manufacturing facility. "We're considering making an offer," Tanaka-san explained during our weekly strategy meeting. "The facility has good bones, and the workforce that remains includes skilled technicians who could be valuable for our North American operations." The irony was almost too perfect to believe. Yamamoto Corp., the company that Blackstone had rejected, was now in a position to acquire Blackstone's assets for a fraction of their original value. Instead of being equal partners in a mutually beneficial relationship, Blackstone would become a subsidiary of the company they had spurned. "What kind of role would you envision for me in that process?" I asked. "You understand Blackstone's operations better than anyone else on our team. If we move forward with the acquisition, we would want you to lead the integration process." The prospect of returning to my former workplace as an executive of the acquiring company was almost too delicious to contemplate. I would be in a position to rehire the employees who had been laid off, restart the partnerships that had been abandoned, and rebuild the company using the relationship-based approach that Blackstone's management had rejected. "I would be very interested in that opportunity," I said. By June, the Yamamoto Corp acquisition of Blackstone Industries was moving forward rapidly. The due diligence process revealed the full extent of the damage that had been done by the consulting firm manipulation and the failed Henderson deal. Equipment had been sold off, key employees had left for competitors, and client relationships had been damaged by the uncertainty surrounding the company's future. But underneath the chaos, the fundamental assets that had originally attracted Yamamoto Corp remained intact. The manufacturing facility was still capable of producing high-precision components. The engineering team included experienced professionals with valuable expertise, and the client base included long-term relationships that could be rebuilt with proper management. The acquisition price was $180 million, less than 7% of the $2.8 billion value that the original partnership would have created. Blackstone's private equity owners had no choice but to accept the offer, as liquidating the company would have yielded even less. On July 15th, exactly 6 months after my termination from Blackstone Industries, I walked back into the building as Senior Vice President of North American Operations for Yamamoto Corp. The security guard who had escorted me out in January now greeted me respectfully in the lobby, and the elevator carried me to the 20th floor where the executive offices had been redesigned according to Japanese business principles. My first official act was to call an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. Nearly 200 employees gathered, many of whom I recognized from my previous 6 years with the company. Some looked curious, others seemed nervous about what the new ownership would mean for their jobs. 6 months ago, this company made a decision to reject a partnership with Yamamoto Corporation in favor of a quick sale that would have eliminated most of your jobs, I began. Today, we're here to announce that Yamamoto Corp has acquired Blackstone Industries with the goal of rebuilding it into the kind of company it should have been all along. I outlined the integration plan, which included rehiring laid-off employees, investing in new equipment, and implementing the partnership strategy that had originally been proposed 18 months earlier. Instead of being sold for parts to Henderson Manufacturing, Blackstone would become the foundation for Yamamoto Corp's North American expansion. Over the next 12 months, we expect to hire approximately 150 new employees and invest $50 million in facility upgrades and new technology. The partnerships that were abandoned will be rebuilt, and new opportunities will be developed using proven relationship-based approaches. The applause that followed was genuine and sustained. These were people who had watched their company nearly destroyed by corporate manipulation and short-term thinking. Now they were being offered the chance to be part of something bigger and more sustainable. After the meeting, I spent the rest of the day touring the facility and meeting with department heads. The manufacturing floor that had been operating at 60% capacity 6 months earlier was now running at full capacity to meet the backlog of orders from Yamamoto Corp's existing clients. The engineering department had been rebuilt with a combination of former Blackstone employees and new hires from Yamamoto Corp's Japanese facilities. The collaboration between American and Japanese engineers was producing innovations that neither group could have achieved independently. Most satisfying of all was the transformation of the corporate culture. The aggressive, short-term focus that had characterized Blackstone's final years had been replaced by the patient, relationship-based approach that Yamamoto Corp had perfected. Over 40 years of international business. As I sat in my new office that evening, looking out at the Seattle skyline, I reflected on the journey that had brought me back to this building under such dramatically different circumstances. 6 months earlier, I had been escorted out as a terminated employee whose integrity had been seen as an obstacle to corporate expediency. Now, I was the senior executive responsible for rebuilding the company using the very principles that had led to my termination. The Yamamoto Corp partnership that Blackstone had rejected was not only moving forward, but had evolved into something even more valuable. Complete integration of two companies that shared common values and complementary capabilities. The revenge I had taken against Blackstone's management had been swift and devastating, but the real victory was longer term and more constructive. By exposing their corruption and demonstrating the value of ethical business practices, I had helped create an outcome that benefited everyone except the consultants and executives who had tried to manipulate the system for their own advantage. Sometimes, justice takes time, but when it finally arrives, it's worth the wait. 2 years after the acquisition, I stood on the rooftop garden of the newly renovated Blackstone Yamamoto facility, watching the sunset paint the Puget Sound in shades of gold and crimson. The building below me hummed with activity as 3 shifts of workers operated around the clock to meet demand from clients across North America and Asia. The transformation had exceeded every projection we had made during the acquisition planning. What started as a rescue operation for a failing company had evolved into one of the most successful international partnerships in Seattle's business history. The facility now employed over 400 people, more than double Blackstone's peak workforce, and the waiting list for engineering positions stretched 6 months into the future. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel Kim, who had become my director of operations after I convinced her to leave her new job at a competing firm. Board meeting went perfectly. Tokyo approved the expansion into Vancouver and Portland. We're officially becoming a regional powerhouse. The Vancouver facility would focus on aerospace components for the Canadian market, while the Portland location would specialize in electric vehicle technologies. Combined with our Seattle operations, Yamamoto Corp's North American division would become a major force in precision manufacturing across multiple industries. But the real measure of our success wasn't found in financial reports or expansion plans. It was in the stories of the people whose lives had been transformed by the company's resurrection. Marcus Blackstone had requested a meeting 3 months after the acquisition. I found him waiting in the lobby one Tuesday morning, looking older and more tired than I remembered. The confident executive who had once dismissed my concerns about the Henderson deal had been replaced by someone who clearly understood the magnitude of his mistakes. "I wanted to apologize," he said as we sat in a quiet corner of the employee cafeteria. "Not just for the termination, but for everything that led up to it. I let consultants and short-term pressures override my judgment about what was best for the company and our employees." "I appreciate that," I replied. "But the apology isn't just mine to accept. There were a lot of people who suffered because of those decisions." Marcus nodded. "I've been following the company's progress under Yamamoto's ownership. What you've accomplished here is remarkable. It's what Blackstone should have become if I had been a better leader." He had started a small consulting firm that specialized in helping companies avoid the kind of manipulation that had destroyed Blackstone. His clients were mostly family-owned businesses that wanted to maintain their independence while growing sustainably. It was honest work, but a far cry from running a major manufacturing corporation. "I hope you understand that what happened wasn't personal," I said. "It was about protecting something valuable from being destroyed." "I understand that now," Marcus replied. "I just wish I had understood it then." The meeting with Marcus was closure for the past, but my focus remained firmly on the future. Yamamoto Corp's success in North America had attracted attention from companies across the Pacific Rim who wanted to establish similar partnerships. My role had evolved from managing a single facility to overseeing strategic development for the entire North American region. The consulting firm scandal that Thomas Chen had uncovered in his investigation had led to federal indictments of 7 executives and the dissolution of 3 major consulting companies. Patricia Henley had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for her role in the scheme, though she served only 8 months before being released to a halfway house. Henderson Manufacturing had filed for bankruptcy protection after their acquisition strategy was exposed as fraud. The private equity firms that had funded their operations faced civil lawsuits from pension funds and institutional investors who had been misled about the nature of their investments. But perhaps the most satisfying development was the ripple effect that our success had created throughout the industry. Other companies that had been targeted by manipulative consultants began questioning the advice they had received and exploring partnership opportunities they had previously rejected. Tanaka-san had been promoted to president of International, operations based largely on the success of the North American division. During his farewell dinner before returning to Tokyo, he shared a perspective that encapsulated everything we had accomplished. When we first approached Blackstone Industries, we were simply looking for a manufacturing partner, he said. What we discovered instead was that American companies needed to remember the value of long-term thinking and relationship building. By demonstrating those principles, we didn't just save one company, we influenced an entire industry. His replacement as North American director was Kenji Nakamura, a brilliant engineer who had spent 15 years developing Yamamoto Corp's expansion strategy. Kenji brought fresh ideas about automation and sustainable manufacturing that would position us perfectly for the next phase of growth. My own career trajectory had been equally dramatic. The success of the Blackstone acquisition had led to offers from 3 different Fortune 500 companies who wanted me to lead their international expansion efforts. But I had declined all of them, choosing instead to accept Yamamoto Corp's offer to become their youngest ever regional vice president. The position came with responsibility for operations in 12 countries and a mandate to identify acquisition targets and partnership opportunities throughout North America and South America. It was the kind of career opportunity that I never could have imagined during my cubicle days at the old Blackstone Industries. The personal satisfaction went beyond professional achievement. Every day, I worked with people who had been given a second chance because someone had been willing to fight for what was right, rather than what was expedient. The engineering team included 3 employees who had been laid off during Blackstone's downsizing and later rehired at significantly higher salaries. The manufacturing floor was staffed by skilled technicians who had thought their careers were over when Henderson Manufacturing's acquisition fell through. Most importantly, the culture we had built emphasized the values that had been missing. From Blackstone's final years, integrity, patience, and respect for long-term relationships over short-term profits. New employees underwent training that included case studies about corporate decision-making, including the story of how Blackstone Industries had nearly been destroyed by consultants who prioritized their own interests over their clients' success. The technology industry transformation that I had initiated also extended beyond our company. The cyber attack on Blackstone's systems had exposed widespread vulnerabilities in corporate network security, leading to industry-wide improvements in access control and monitoring systems. Ironically, my unauthorized access had ultimately made the business community more secure by highlighting weaknesses that could have been exploited by genuine criminals. As I prepared to leave the rooftop garden that evening, I received a call from Thomas Chen, whose book about corporate consulting fraud had become a bestseller and launched his career as a business investigative journalist. "I wanted to give you a heads up about tomorrow's announcement," he said. "The Justice Department is launching a task force to investigate consulting firm practices across multiple industries. They're calling it Operation Clean Slate. The federal investigation would examine hundreds of corporate transactions over the past decade, looking for patterns of manipulation similar to what had happened to Blackstone." Thomas estimated that the probe could result in billions of dollars in restitution for companies and pension funds that had been defrauded by corrupt consulting arrangements. "Your story was the catalyst for all of this," Thomas explained. "When the Blackstone case demonstrated how consulting firms could manipulate major corporate decisions, it opened investigators' eyes to a much larger problem." After ending the call, I realized that the consequences of standing up to corporate corruption had extended far beyond my personal situation or even Blackstone Industries. The ripple effects were still spreading through the business community, creating accountability and transparency where none had existed before. As I drove home through the Seattle streets, past the gleaming towers of successful companies and the construction sites of new developments, I reflected on how different my life had become since that devastating voicemail message 2 years earlier. The termination that had seemed like the end of my career had actually been the beginning of something much more significant. The woman who had been fired for refusing to betray a client relationship had become a leader in ethical business practices. The employee who had been told she was too emotionally invested in her work, had proven that emotional investment, care for clients, respect for employees, and commitment to integrity was actually the foundation of sustainable success. Sometimes, the universe has a sense of justice that operates on a timeline longer than corporate quarterly reports. Sometimes doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything in the short term, creates opportunities that are far better than anything you originally lost. And sometimes, when powerful people betray your trust and try to destroy your career, the best revenge isn't just getting even, it's proving them so completely wrong that their own failures become cautionary tales, while your success becomes an inspiration. The phone on my desk would ring tomorrow with new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to build something meaningful. But tonight, driving through the city where my career had been reborn, I was simply grateful for the reminder that integrity, patience, and the willingness to fight for what's right never go out of style. They just sometimes take a little longer to pay dividends than the quarterly earnings reports would prefer. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.